Hey, how you doing? It's Andrew again from Reptiles Unlimited in Deer Park, New York. Just wanted to go over a couple of things. We have a nice fish tank display here at the shop, saltwater tank. This is a fish-only system that has certain characteristics that are better for keeping just saltwater fish. I don't have any corals or other invertebrates in the tank like shrimp or anemones or anything like that. When you have a saltwater aquarium and you just have fish in the tank, it allows you to control certain parameters such as salinity, temperature, lighting, and it allows you to kind of deter diseases, and it allows you to medicate pretty freely. You can use medications like copper and other deterrents to parasites that you normally wouldn't be able to use in a reef tank. When you have a reef tank, and we'll go over that in another video, you can't do certain things like dropping salinity. So in which case the salinity in this tank is kept at 1.014 or 1.5, and that is much lower than what the natural ocean would be at. And it takes some of the stress off the fish as far as them battling certain diseases like parasites and stuff. As far as medication is concerned, as I said earlier, you can use certain medications in this tank that you wouldn't be able to use in another tank, and we'll go over all that in depth. Today we're going to concentrate on feeding. When it comes to saltwater fish, one of the biggest challenges is finding the right type of foods and matching it up with the fish themselves. In most community freshwater tanks, using flakes or maybe some dried worms is adequate enough to bring most of the fish into their full splendor. In a marine saltwater tank, you have some specialized feeders, such as our dog-faced puffer here. I don't know if you can see him popping in and out of the shot. He's a pretty specialized feeder. He's going to want some real meaty foods that you can't really get out of a can, and that brings you into having to use frozen foods. I'm going to show you a little sample of the frozen food that I use to feed the fish. One of the biggest challenges with frozen food is the way that it's packaged. When you defrost the food itself, you end up with kind of a liquid that's saturated with some of the nutrients from the food as it defrosts. It kind of tends to get tinged with just some of the material that's packed in with the frozen food. It's very important that that liquid does not get introduced to the tank. It's one of the biggest problems in the hobby. Coming from a professional standpoint, having a pet store, I can't stress enough how once you defrost the food in the cup, whether you use fresh water, which is recommended to defrost saltwater marine type foods, because it helps flush a little bit of the possible contaminants out. Some people like to use tank water. Some people will use warm water from the tap, which is really not recommended because it tends to turn the food a little faster. So cold tap water is really what I recommend. You could use filtered water, water that's been standing for 48 hours, just so that it dechlorinates naturally. Some of the heavy metals and minerals will tend to settle and balance out in the 48 hours. In this case, I'm going to show you a sample of one of the most commonly used foods, which is a cube. In this case, I have brine shrimp and I have mysis shrimp, or a zooplankton defrosting right now. I'm going to show you that in an edited shot. Silver sides, like for our puffer friend and for the wrasses that we have here. And also a flat pack. So you see those big square flat sheets of frozen shrimp or silver sides at the pet store. Those, once you defrost them, are notorious for kind of creating this juice that's left over in the cup. So what you could do is you could take the cup and you could actually pour the contents of the cup, the shrimp or the silver sides, whatever you defrosted, pour that into a net, and just give that a rinse underneath the sink to flush out some of the waste product that you kind of get from when you defrost the food. Also, and I could show you right here, very simply, what I do is when I defrost some of the shrimp, I have a medication. That's called Metroplex from Seachem. What this allows you to do is administer a small scoop. It actually comes with a scooper in the vial. I'll demonstrate that here. Once you pick up a little scoop, maybe for this particular feeding, a quarter of the scooper is filled with the medication. And you can't really see it right. It's probably not going to focus. Let me see if I can touch the screen and bring it into focus. There you go. So you can see some of the medicine. And what this does is once you add this to the cup of food as it defrosts, kind of mix it around a little bit, that medicine, which is a very common anti-parasitic, kind of an antimicrobial medicine, will actually enter the gut of the fish and help fight any internal parasites. It'll actually help fight gill flukes, trematodes, ick itself. You don't want to overdo it. If you are treating for a specific targeted disease, you follow the directions. Let's say out of the 3 to 5 feedings that you would do in a week, you would want to do 2 medicated feedings. I'll include a link in the comments, above the comments, with a link to the medicine itself. In this case, I don't have any visual signs of disease in the tank right now. Most of the fish are very happy. However, I'm going to use this as a prophylactic to just kind of fight anything that might be brewing and to keep the fish healthy and happy. Not only will it soak into the food, but when you put the food in the tank, it'll also help treat the tank a little bit too. Going to swirl this around a little bit. Still has some time to defrost, so that's got another probably 5 to 10 minutes. Plus, with the medication that I added, you want that to sit at least 10 to 20 minutes so that the food has a chance to soak up the medicine. As of right now, I'm going to edit in a shot of the foods that we have available. Let me demonstrate here. I'm actually going to switch around the camera a little bit so that you can see exactly what's going on. So here you have a sample of the most common foods that's really used, which is silver sides, cubed shrimp and brine shrimp, and a flat pack of either krill. In this case, I'm using regular small shrimps. They're all soaking in fresh water. Helps loosen up some of the some of the matter that's on the items. But you could see this particular batch of silver sides is not too bad. Plus, it's got a little bit more defrosting to go. But you could see very easily in here, once this food starts really starting to break up from the cube, what you're getting is that tinged water. And you can see it very clearly there. Once these cubes are pretty much fully defrosted, what I'll do is I'll pass them through a fine net, like a brine shrimp net, and that way it gives a chance for the fresh water to flush out any really fine particles of food which are not going to feed your fish. All they're going to do is they're going to get into your filtration system, they're going to add to your total dissolved solids, they're going to basically pollute your tank. So with that said, we're going to wait another few minutes. I'm going to cut to another scene. We're going to let the food defrost a little bit more, and we're going to feed our fish. Okay, so we're back now, and if you could see if the camera can catch this, what I've done is I put the shrimp that we've defrosted earlier, I've put it into a net, small net, and I've rinsed it well. And what that does is that helps rinse any just contaminants away, just kind of the liquid remnants of some of the food from the defrosting process. I've rinsed that away because it's not going to feed your fish. It's really just going to feed the algae in your tank and make maintenance a little bit more difficult. If you can see here, very important that I'm actually going to feed in the same place where the fish are pretty much expecting it. It's away from the filtration system, which happens to be on the left side of this particular Perfecto tank. And I'm going to feed on the right side. If you feed to the left, it may confuse the fish because then the jets are going to blow it. A lot of the times what people will do, and I can demonstrate that very easily on this tank, is they'll actually turn off the filtration system during feeding. Keep in mind, when you turn off the filtration system on the tank, you may put a little additional wear and tear on the pump itself. So you have to keep that in mind, whether you have an aquarium maintenance company taking care of your tank or you're a hobbyist. What happens is when you shut down a pump, there is a percentage of a chance that the pump's not going to start again. So in the case of an older pump, you may not want to use this particular method. But if you have a newer pump, which I happen to have on this tank, and you're confident about it taking the abuse of the constant shutting off and turning on, it's pretty recommended that the pump gets shut off. It gives a chance for the fish to grab onto the food, to ingest the small particles, because any food that gets sent into the filtration system is going to have to be broken down by the filter. The filter is really designed to break down waste of the fish. Waste of the fish already has bacteria in it. It's already food that's been broken down by the gut of the fish. And your filtration system now has the opportunity to break it down a little bit further. When you introduce a food item directly into your fish tank filter, which happens a lot, especially during overfeeding, you now have to rely on the bacteria in the filter to break down that actual food item, which really filters really don't handle well. So it's very important that you don't get the food, especially the liquid that we've flushed down the sink from rinsing. It's very important you don't get that food into your filter, stuck in a pre-filter, stuck in your pads, whatever the case may be. We want this to go into the mouth and the belly of the fish. So as you can see, once the fish kind of hone in on the food, it's not going to take long for the fish to kind of to really nail it and finish it off. It's very quickly what they eat within pretty much a few seconds. They may fight over a couple of pieces, in which case I have some of the brine shrimp, which I rinsed as well, just to occupy some of the smaller mouths in the tank and to keep them happy. See up here. So now there's some smaller items for some of the smaller mouths to take. Even our Mr. Puffer, of course, is going to attack just about anything that he sees. And actually, I'm going to try to put a silver side in there, which he's going to love. There he goes. So that's going to occupy him definitely for a significant amount of time. There you go. And there she is. He's taking some nice bites out of it. He's enjoying it. Some remnants will come off the silver side as he's eating. That's to be expected, and that will also help feed some of the smaller fish as well. Very important that there's no uneaten food left over. That's really the problem with most home aquariums, is overfeeding. It's 95% of fish tank issues. When fish get sick, when the water's cloudy, when the tank just doesn't look vibrant, it's usually due to overfeeding. And if you follow the directions on most of the packages, they'll tell you to feed twice a day. And unless you're giving very controlled amounts and you have an overabundance of filtration, feeding your tank twice a day, you're going to wind up hurting your fish and ending up with a very cloudy, very dirty, algae-filled aquarium. Fish food in general has a lot of protein in it, contains a lot of iron and nutrients, and that's not only is that considered fish food, but that's considered algae food as well. So Mr. Puffer's having a great time feeding on his silver side, which happens to be quite a large piece. So towards the end of this little feeding session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn the filtration system back on with the lighting. once the filtration system comes back on, it may actually start pushing the food around a little bit more, which will get the fish more excited. They like to eat moving food, and he's having the time of his life over there. So what I'm going to watch for is, I'm going to let him eat a little bit more off that silver side. He may pick on it for another 15 minutes. If there's any remnants of it that don't get eaten, like the tail or some of the, just some of the leftovers, I'm going to net those out. I'm not going to allow them to stay in the tank. Very, very, very important that you don't let them get trapped underneath the decoration or up against the filter. It's just not going to be good for the fish. So just make sure that when you feed, you do the proper follow-up, and that there's no leftover food in the tank. So he's got about another 5 to 10 minutes to feed on that silver side, and then I'll most likely net out whatever's left over. Okay, so we're just going to briefly go over feeding the reef tank really quick. In a reef tank, usually you have smaller fish, more invertebrate critters like snails and starfish, and each one kind of has to be fed in a specific way. In a reef tank that's running with a proper filtration system, you could be a little bit more liberal as to some of the finer foods that you put into the tank, including even some of the liquid leftover that we had spoken about earlier, because you have things like protein skimmers and heavy UV sterilizers that will help neutralize some of those liquids. But also the presence of corals and anemones will actually feed on some of that liquid protein that you're adding to the tank with those foods. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to feed some of the pre-rinsed brine shrimp, but actually just from it sitting for a few minutes, some of the liquids kind of come out again, which is going to be great for some of the small filter feeders that I have on this particular tank. So as you can see, the fish are coming right up to it. They love it. Some of the leftover food may get trapped by some of the worms in there or some of the anemones, so it's not a problem. In the case of the starfish, even with some anemones as well, you want to feed them directly. So in this case, what I'm going to attempt to do is I'm going to give that starfish a piece of fish to eat, another small piece of the silver side that was left over from when I fed the main tank. Okay, so what I've actually done is I've actually taken the starfish off the glass and I've put him on top of the piece of silver side. As you may or may not know, starfish actually will open up kind of their center cavity and they will ingest their food a certain way, with some of their stomach action being actually external to their body. So I've placed him on top of the silver side. I'm sure he's going to be very happy with it. And I'm probably going to repeat the process for the other starfish that I have in the tank. I'll get more into reef tank feeding and chemicals and adding calcium in a different video. But for now, I hope you enjoyed this little session about how to feed frozen food to your saltwater aquatic fish. Thanks for tuning in. Like, subscribe, and check out my other videos.